Adventures on the Gorge presents The Adventure Forum. Adventures on the Gorge Resort sits on the very rim of the New River Gorge, America's newest national park. We have whitewater rafting that can be as mild or as wild as you want. We'll take kids as young as 6, and 6 to 11-year-olds raft free every day all summer long. We have cabins on site, restaurants, zip lining, and a lot more. Plus, we're only a bridge away from the shops and restaurants of Fayetteville. Are you ready for an adventure? Check us out on the web at adventuresonthegorge.com.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Adventure Forum. I am Chris Hayes, your forum host, coming to you live from Adventures on the Gorge on the very rim of the New River Gorge, America's newest national park and preserve. For our viewers watching on Zoom or Facebook Live, if you have any questions for our guests, please use Zoom's question and answer function or Facebook comments to submit them at any time. Near the end, we'll open the discussion to questions from viewers if time allows. There are very few outdoor sports growing faster than rock climbing right now. And oddly enough, most of that growth is occurring in places where there are no actual rocks to climb. That growth is fueling record gear sales and climbing tourism, but also in some ways threatening access to the very cliffs climbers rely on. Tonight, we have 3 experts in their field. We have Gene Kistler, co-owner of Waterstone Outdoors here in Fayetteville and president of the New River Alliance of Climbers. We have Wes Napier, if I said that correctly, I hope, of Top Gun Sales, which represents climbing brands like Sterling Rope, Evolve Climbing Shoes, and Wild Country. And Doug Cosby, a legendary New River Gorge first ascensionist and owner of the Inner Peaks Climbing Gyms in Charlotte, North Carolina. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you for being here. We're going to jump right into the questions here that we have for you guys. And we're going to start off with Gene. And that question is, why is the New River Gorge region so loved by climbers?
Because of a number of reasons. It's a beautiful setting. It's amazing forest. And the Nuttall sandstone that this place is made out of always impresses. Climbers from all over the world have said over the past 30 plus years that they've climbed a lot of places, but they've never climbed on rock like the Nuttall sandstone. And so it's highly featured. There are cracks, there are walls that appear blank, but as you begin to explore the feature, you find a way, and there's a lot of rock. I think in the early days, it was really appealing because people could spread out and sort of have your own place, to explore and develop. I don't know, Doug, what do you think? What would you say? Why is the New River Gorge so important to climbers? Why is it so special?
Well, I've always thought that it was hands down the best single pitch rock climbing in the United States. Single pitch is defined as the length of a rope. So typically as much as 80 to 100 feet, usually for rock climbs. One's where you go up with a single rope and you come right back to the ground. So for those shorter one trip up experiences, the rock quality is just better than anywhere else. And it's also pretty compact. So there's a lot of density. If you're climbing with people of varying ability levels, you've got challenges within 50 feet of each other that vary quite a bit. So you can be out climbing with people that are need a easier grade. And then if you got one of your hot shots in tow, you walk them down the cliff 50 feet and there's something for them. So I think it's just that it is the best rock, in my opinion, that I've climbed in the United States.
The bouldering has really exploded in this area over the past, it's always had its little spikes, but lately it's a steady push. People are exploring, finding boulders. The boulders are not concentrated like other popular areas that are known for bouldering, like the Waco Tanks. But if you go in the woods, you will find amazing giant boulders. I was on the Meadow River today with a fellow who's recently bought some land and moved there, and he has this full 4-wheel drive rig, and we got in the woods, and after climbing here for over 30 years, I saw things I'd never seen before. And that's another amazing aspect of this area, is that right around the corner, you just don't know what you're going to find. There's the Meadow River Gorge, there's the New River Gorge, there's the Golly River Gorge, there's the dam on the Golly River that creates Centerville Lake. Centerville Lake is an amazing place to climb. And in the wintertime, they drain it 77 feet, and you can hike the lake bed and get to all these cliff lines that are inundated with the lake water in the summertime. And so there's, you go there in the wintertime. So it's something you don't do until the winter. So it's a new thing every year. Hominy Creek, another creek, Tom's Creek, people keep finding rock. And, the odd thing is, I'd probably say the tallest piece of rock that I've ever seen around here is on Hominy Creek. It's not even on the New River Gorge, which is, the grand tall gorge in the area.
Gene, you mentioned the sport of bouldering just a minute ago. Would you mind kind of explaining for any viewers that might not know what that is, what that means, how that's different from roped climbing?
Yeah, bouldering, there's no ropes, there's no gear. You have a pad to land on if you fall, and you find short, hard problems that help you develop your skills to power through harder moves. The point in bouldering is to find hard, develop as a problem-solving climber. I'd say, people boulder, there's some high balls up to 30 feet. But generally bouldering happens, below 20 feet.
And I always like to tell people that it happens quite literally, usually on boulders.
Yeah.
That's
Boulders have all these sides. So it's not like a cliff where it's just two-dimensional. You've got this three-dimensional thing that you can just crawl all over, and then there's another one and another one and another one.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a bouldering guide to the area.
Yeah. I've definitely seen more crash pads, like you mentioned. For folks that don't know what those are, if you see somebody walking down the road with what appears to be a sleeping pad strapped to their back, that is a crash pad for bouldering. And I've definitely seen those on tops of cars a lot more in the last few years around here. So, all right, Doug, let's
best crag in America. That's
what
we'll say.
Doug, what do you think is fueling the rapid growth of climbing, and really where in this area that climbers that might be coming to this area, where are they coming from? Where do they live? I mean, we have our local scene here, but the climbing tourism, where are they coming from?
Well, I don't know how it is now, but when I was active there, people came from everywhere. And I assume that you're still getting big influxes from the major cities that, are within a weekend drive, particularly now with climbing gyms. I think climbing gyms have probably really changed the landscape at the New. I remember 30 years ago, a handful of us would be the only people that we would see all day. And I don't think you can do that in any of the popular areas now. I'm sure because the place is so vast, you can get away from the crowds, but it takes a bit more work.
Okay, and Wes, so as climbers come in, climbers need gear. What are your biggest, what sells the most, and what does that tell us about the growth of the sport?
Is that bad? No, it's good.
Yeah, so
no, it is bad.
A lot of climbers, for us, as far as growth of the sport, a lot of climbers obviously need kind of a few basic things, and that's going to be climbing shoes, climbing harnesses, particularly at the New River Gorge, a climbing rope, and then there's some associated hardware. So for us, we've seen a lot of growth in all of those categories, everything from ropes to carabiners, harnesses. We've been selling a lot of entry-level climbing shoes, people that are just getting into the sport. So a little bit more of a comfortable, get used to your foot being in kind of a tighter footwear. And then we've also seen a really strong increase in, advanced climbing shoes as well. So people who have already maybe had their first pair of climbing shoes or have gone to a gym and tried out maybe their rental shoes, and they're looking into get, kind of their own equipment. So we've seen a lot of growth in, just about all the categories of equipment.
Yeah, one thing that's special about the New is there's lots of sport climbing where all you need is a rope and some quick draws, and then there's lots of track climbing where you can find a way to use pretty much any widget out there.
Where do you see I guess this is kind of for both Gene and Wes a little bit. Gene, as a gear shop owner, I know when I used to manage a couple of climbing gyms up in Michigan, and that was right around the time that the internet was really becoming a big thing, and buying stuff on the internet was a big thing. So I guess, Wes, my question to you is, do you see more sales in that, or as a wholesaler, are you selling more to internet shops, or do you think the company is selling more to internet online shops than?
No, we see a lot of business really. With climbing gear particularly, it has to fit a certain way. And most likely, I mean, we definitely see a lot more sales in climbing gyms and outdoor shops like Waterstone. I think really getting that specialty, that one-on-one service from a really good specialty retailer store, or climbing gyms, you get that one-on-one, and the proper recommendations for that area. So it really is like, especially with you want to try those on. So it really is, I would definitely say it's more in store than it is online.
That's good to hear.
That is good to hear.
That's because I mean, when I worked in those climbing gyms, managed those climbing gyms, I was helping somebody try on shoes for an hour, and then they tell me they're going to go buy them online because they're cheaper. And I'm like, well, that's because they're not paying somebody to stand here and help you try these shoes on. So to everybody out there listening, if you're looking to get into climbing, go to a climbing specialty gear shop. You're going to get the right fit, the right product, and what you need, and what's going to make you a more successful climber.
The little bit of internet business that we do at Waterstone is built around either guidebooks that are particular to the area that, it may be hard to find, or other odd little bits of gear that are very sort of arcane and just germane to, they say, solo climbing. There's a device called the Soloist, which allows you to self-belay, and other specialty items online. That's the only thing we've gained any traction with. People come in. We had the shoe trier honors when the internet started too, and we started running them off. And then that just kind of went away.
Yeah, I felt kind of like that. I did feel bad, saying, well, buddy, the reason that I'm not going to help you try on shoes, man, because.
Well, they say we want to try on shoes, and we'd say, well, are you here to size your shoes so you can buy them on, Moose Jaw? Or are you here to support this little business?
Support us.
I think
it was always laughing. We were
I think that's changed recently, at least for us, because we've been in retail in climbing gyms now for 25 years. Not too many years ago, some of the suppliers and some of the manufacturers didn't want their gear in climbing gyms. And it was probably 6 years ago, maybe a little longer, that the major manufacturers started begging us to represent their gear. Because
where the market's at.
I'm sorry?
I said it's where the market's at.
Yeah, I mean, the Gene situation is unique in that you get all the weekend traffic. You've got this amazing store with really good staff that uses the gear, that knows the area, and it's a real magnet to come to. That's much different than the big box stores or the internet sales where you're not getting the interaction with people. And I think what the gear manufacturers recognize is that climbing gyms, there are some real bozos working behind the counter at climbing gyms, but for the most part, those people are more knowledgeable and they're actual climbers and they're using the gear. And you've also got a captive audience. I mean, we'll have, hundreds of check-ins a night. And all we have to do is take a little vertical space to display gear. So the footprint of the retail sales for us costs almost nothing. Our staff's already paid to be there, so we don't have to pay somebody to sit there, and we have this huge traffic flow through. And I think what the manufacturers saw was that as gyms grew the popularity of climbing, they wanted their gear represented by those more knowledgeable end users that were working behind the counter at climbing gyms, as opposed to somebody on the phone at an internet sales place or in these larger outfits. No knock against REI, but it's hard for them to consistently have good quality representation and gear knowledge. Again, an outfit like Waterstone is unique in that they've got tremendous knowledge of the gear that you're just not going to get at, from buying something on the internet or from one of these big stores, the big, the big box.
I think something that sustained us over the years is the fact that we're at a climbing area. If you look around at the really vital brick and mortar shops that are out there, they're all attached to an area where people go to recreate. The hometown shop is kind of taking a hit. I know a lot of folks wait and come, like the gendarme was at Seneca. I mean, for years, if you wanted gear, that's where you went to find gear. Wayne Sayer had Blue Ridge Outdoors early on in Blacksburg, and he did a good job of stocking gear. But
yeah, I'd be curious what Wes thinks, but I think that the Waterstone is very similar in a way to a climbing gym gear shop in that all the climbers have come to that area. They haven't come physically to that building to do their climbing, but they're there for climbing, and they have access to these, to experts in the field in much the same way that people are coming to the climbing gyms, and we just happen to have the gear displayed for them. But what are you seeing, Wes? Oh,
I'm sorry, Doug, I couldn't hear you. My internet connection went down.
oh, no, Gene was saying that he's been very fortunate that he's next to world-class rock climbing. And so he gets this constant flow,
Yes.
particularly on the weekends. There's some ebb and flow to it, but he's got a constant flow of customers. And climbing gyms have the same effect, where there's hundreds of customers walking through the door every day, in the same way that you've got thousands and thousands of people coming to the new every weekend. What's going on in other parts of in other cities where we don't, outside of climbing gyms? Are you seeing Waterstones thrive, or are those stores struggling in that setting?
I think where there's, in places where there's not a climbing area, they're still doing okay. I know in other climbing areas, like in the Southeast region, where there's an outdoor shop next to a major climbing destination, they're going to capture a lot of that business. Like one, for instance, an example would be like the Red River Gorge. But climbing gyms, I think, with so many new people coming into the sport, the climbing gym's their first stop, and if they have like a stocked up kind of a pro shop with all that gear, they're going to, it's going to add a little bit more credibility, I feel like, to that gym, just having that gear that people are looking for. Yeah, and I think that's kind of a huge draw for people, is they can come in, they can talk to people at the gym, and not necessarily have to travel to an area before they purchase their first pair of climbing shoes, for instance.
One thing we noticed this last spring when the pandemic hit, we closed on March 18th, and we didn't open back up until the beginning of June. And we spent that time in between trying to figure out if the world was going to end and if we're all going to die. And then we opened the shop back up, and it was so busy. It seemed so weird to be in the midst of this pandemic and business kind of shooting through the roof. And what we kind of discovered was that, all the climbing gyms had closed, and people who wanted to climb needed a rope, and they needed some quick draws. And that was the case for hundreds of people. The old stat from, who's the fellow who started Earth Treks? Chris
Warner.
Chris Warner. Yeah, we were talking, it was a few years ago. It was probably 5 years ago. And he said that as far as he could tell, they've been sort of looking into it. The current stat in gyms was that only 20% of the people in gyms expressed any interest in going outdoors. And, and fewer than that went outdoors. And that was like, well, that's probably a good thing, because, there are limits to capacity in these various climbing areas. But I think that number probably has just been blown out the window through the discoveries that so many people have made this past year.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if that number was quite a bit different nowadays. Yeah. And I wonder if as gyms open back up, as people go back into gyms and try gyms out for the first time, if that number will stay the same as far as like the higher percentage run. Like, all right, I'm ready to get outside now. Hopefully it does.
A lot of people who enjoy the gym environment socially and physically, it's the workout, and it's not like they're trying to go anywhere. They love the gym.
Speaking of gyms, Gene, if you had your wishes, what would you want indoor climbers to know before they make the transition and come out to the New River Gorge?
Well, that's such a loaded question. What they need to know is they got to get their shit together, and they need to know that they shouldn't make any assumptions about what it's going to be like. I mean, people have either camped or they haven't camped. There are a lot of climbers here at the New these days who have never camped. And so when it comes to, sort of leave no trace practices in the woods, knowing how to, take a dump in the woods, knowing how to behave respectfully in nature, how to reduce your impacts, how to share the space. One thing I've noticed in popular sport climbing areas here, for example, like the regular Somersville area, is that I think a lot of gym climbers come to areas and they create the same environment that they are used to in a gym, which is a lot of people hanging out. There's no, you're not going to go away with your to a quiet piece of woods and go climbing all day. You're hanging with your friends, you're putting up your hammocks, you've got your dogs, there's sort of a date scene going on, and you want people to enjoy the outdoors the way they would like. But I think all climbers need to understand that there are limits to how many people can crowd a crag. If there are limits to how many cars can be parked in a parking lot, and you've got to be flexible. We're starting to see more carpooling this spring among climbers. I really am glad to see that, because we've definitely got some big issues with parking with the increased numbers. I think people coming outdoors from gyms, we want to encourage them to talk to folks in the area and talk to people at the crag, and spend some time exploring. To jump from the gym to the perfect situation outdoors where you are climbing like you want to climb, it takes some time to find that spot, and to find that spot when it's available. You see more crowding on popular easy sport climbing areas. I would think that people have got to start using their flexibility in their jobs to climb during the week, and try to spread out that use. I'm spending more and more of my time with large landowners in the area that, they have climbing resources on their property, to find ways to maybe provide public access to these areas, either in lease form. I mean, a lot of big landowners here are comfortable with hunting leases. There's a situation now where there's sort of a rec lease being laid over a hunting lease. And so how do we spread these folks out? How do we limit the impacts that large crowds bring to an area? Where you're going to see it, you're going to see it at the base of the cliff. Yeah. And where you're going to beat out, you want to put your gear down on rocks. You want to try to not beat things down. At the top of the cliff, a lot of the routes have top anchors. There's been a real push over the last 20 years to add top anchors. But those are the two most sensitive areas in the forest where there's a cliff line, is the top of the cliff and the bottom of the cliff. And, if you're in the park, you're going to hear a lot about Allegheny wood rats and green salamanders. And it's important to learn about these habitats and how we interact with them. And, it's not like climbing indoors. That's probably, it's a hard translation.
Yeah, you may have much more of an impact outdoors than you do indoors. Every person answers.
You just got to spend some time hiking around and exploring and figuring out your way to be there. I don't know. What do you think, Doug?
Well,
you're an outdoor climber who built gyms. I mean,
yeah, no, we destroyed climbing. There is a lot of talk within the climbing gym industry about the role of gyms and how we continue. One thing I will tell you is that in 10 years, you're going to have double the number of climbers.
Yeah.
So if you think it's bad now, think about doubling that. That's crazy. There are some pluses to the increased numbers. We've all gotten incredibly rich, so that's been nice. And I'm kidding. But the number of people that can help with advocacy now has grown. You always have, it's only like 1 out of 100 people that actually pitches in and goes to a trail day or does the work. But the more people you have to draw from, the more people you have to help you with that. In North Carolina, the Carolina Climbers Coalition has had great success in acquiring access to areas, in some cases acquiring areas and opening up more resources like you were just talking about, Gene. So there are some upsides to that, but we are going to see this huge crowding. There has always been a mentorship component to your entry into climbing. So if you go back to the dark ages when we started climbing, there just weren't that many people. And so you met the more experienced climbers. You just didn't have a choice. There were only so many people there and you were going to meet them. And when you were doing stupid things, they would call you out. And I think that the growth is happening so fast now that we don't have the mentors in the same numbers that we used to have. I mean, we've always had bad actors. We've always had people that have done dumb things at the cliff, have vandalized or left trash or done these things. So there's a certain percentage of that, but it's been much easier to, I think, self-police as a community. And as the numbers grow, particularly the new people being introduced are growing at this exponential rate, you don't have the mentors to help them. So that would be, kind of my observation at this point. And the climbing gym industry is talking about how to have some impact, and there are most gyms now have some programming. You'll frequently see a gym to crag kind of a program where they'll preach some of these things, but it is hard to get people to pay for guides and for lessons for outdoor climbing. It always has been, I think, and that's the big problem that gyms have, is how to monetize that so that you can afford staff to actually work with people. So yeah, I don't have the solution, but it is being talked about. At least we've recognized it as a problem. And so people are now trying to figure out what we can do to help matters. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and that's great to hear, honestly. Like I said, coming from having managed a couple of climbing gyms, and that was back in the mid 2000s, early to mid 2000s. And even when I taught lead climbing classes, because I knew that the people were wanting to make that transition outdoors, I always tried to throw in a little bit of, the leave no trace and make sure you understand where you're going, what their local ethics are, and that kind of stuff. So it's good to see hear that the industry itself is kind of pushing towards that.
I think a good way to describe a way for new folks who are sort of new to outdoor climbing to look at it is to consider yourself a guest. You come to a gym, you're a paid customer, you're here to do what you want to do. What's been borne out over and over again with climbing closures and climbing areas that are open. In most cases, it's been a reflection of the way climbers have treated an area. And I think even on public lands, we should think of ourselves as guests. We should think of this opportunity to climb outdoors in these amazing places as a not a right, but a privilege. And I'll also say, we have a thing we do every May. We've done for 6 years. We didn't do it last year because of the pandemic, called the Not Work Week, where we invite people to come and do a week of trail work. It's 8 days of trail work. And we pull together the money to feed everybody for a week. Pete Kingham, who's head of trails here, he got in touch this winter, and we were talking about Not Work Week this spring. We have an unfinished project, which is completing a really pimp job on the Kmore Trail. Doug, I don't know if you've hiked Kmore in a while, but we're going to wrap that up.
Yeah, apparently it's wheelchair accessible now. So.
No, not
Not
Not-
quite, not quite.
but so we put the word out like a month ago that we're going to do not work weekend. The response has been amazing, and the support that we've gotten from the gyms, including Doug, which are regional gyms that feed climbers into the new. I think there's a concern in these gyms to support our efforts to be stewards of the climbing area and maintain the trails and maintain fixed anchors and I don't know if it's people just kind of getting stir crazy, but the response this spring, I just tell you today, 52 people have responded already, and that not work week is going to be March 15th to March 22nd. And I was really encouraged that the Park Service wanted to do it, and we'll deal with the pandemic protocols. But every time we do that, that can change people's perspective. People go, I never knew how these trails ever got here, things like that. And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of education that needs to occur, but it needs to occur sort of in that mentorship spirit that Doug's talking about, where you're trying to help people find a way to climb, to be outdoors and climb and be proud of the way they climb outdoors. And every time I've had it with some nonsense at the crag and I start talking to people, you find that really all these folks are out there. They really want to know, they want to learn, they want to know the deal. And so, it's just a new challenge.
I'm going to take a quick program break here, guys, and I'd kind of like to stay along with that subject if we can when we come back. So if anybody's out there is just joining us, welcome to the Adventure Forum. I am Chris Hayes, your forum host. Every other week, we are hosting discussions on topics of interest for both local and traveling adventurers. We are live at Adventures on the Gorge Resort on the very rim of the New River Gorge, America's newest national park. If you have any questions for our guests, please use Zoom's Q&A function or Facebook comments to submit them at any time. And near the end, we will open up the discussion to questions from our viewers if time allows. One of the questions that I've got as we've been talking about this current subject is, I've heard you mention, Doug, the CCC, the Carolina Climbers Coalition. I know here, Gene, you've been talking a little bit about trying to find new land or new areas to open. And we've got the Climbers Coalition here over in the Red River Gorge. They've got their coalition. We've seen these coalitions purchase land so that they can maintain access to it. And I'm just curious, are you guys seeing that? And Wes, maybe you know a little better because you travel a little bit more. Is this something that's happening nationwide? Climbing organizations getting out there and trying to purchase land so that they can control it and keep it open for climbing?
Yeah, I think it's pretty widespread. I live over in Chattanooga, Tennessee. I know we have the Southeastern Climbers Coalition, and one of their main focuses is just trying to purchase that land for future preservation. We've got a lot of private land down in Tennessee, so it's not quite as designated and protected. So, and now there's the East Tennessee Climbers Coalition, and I think that's mostly based around the Obed climbing area, kind of around the Knoxville area. So I feel like it's definitely becoming more prevalent. I see a lot of fundraisers for the CCC going on every time I travel through, Western Carolina, especially.
Gotcha. And the goal of that is, but again, to I think allow for the climbers to maintain access and hold on to access that is a threat of being potentially lost. But also, like as Gene, I think you mentioned earlier, about spreading climbers out so that we're not impacting areas quite as much as more and more climbers come into areas. And I've got a question coming in from one of our Facebook viewers that I'm just going to go ahead and throw in here. This is from Jeremy. I'm sorry. This is from Adam. He's wondering if there are any new climbing areas coming online in the New River Gorge area in the near future, Gene?
Well, there's a new edition of the Volume 2 guidebook coming out. That's might have gone to press. That's Wolverine Publishing, Jeff Aki doing that. And Volume 2 covers the Meadow River, the climbing on the Gauley River, and Centerville Lake. And so they're going to be new routes, and I'm not certain about new areas. There's always a discussion about what to include and what not to include. It always kind of pivots on whether or not there's some kind of reliable access there. And there's climbing on Centerville Lake that you if you're going to get to it from dry land, you're going to have to probably sneak through somebody's yard over in Foxfield Farms, near Somersville, or other areas, but you can get to it all by water. And so Mikey Williams, who's the guidebook author, I said, why don't we do like a section of Volume 2 of like, if you have a boat and you have a way to like get out of the boat to these different shore areas, you could lay out, additional climbing that's been out there for a long time. There's just no way to get to it from dry land. There's some, the best thing that I wanted to do in areas that aren't published is to come hang out and get someone to take them out climbing. But generally around here, people don't talk about those places, and we try to keep them off social media, and because so often, you have a special arrangement with someone who says you can park on their farm and you can hike off the back, and we've been doing that forever. And there's been sort of an ethic of, new people. You take someone to a place, you don't tell them how to get there, you don't talk about it, you don't send out pictures, but you take them there and you spend a day with them in a new area, and they come away with a proper appreciation of that place, maybe a longer hike that's involved if you want to go there. So almost all these climbing areas are on private property where no one ever goes unless they have a dead cow they want to throw in the woods. But they don't go there. And so, there have been few enough people to where that's never been an issue. But I would say to Adam to just come hang out in town and ask about the Fringe and go out there. And the two things that have kind of wrecked climbing in my perspective over the last few years is a combination of the swell of numbers of sort of non-nature oriented people in climbing gyms and social media. Because when you discover climbing, you want to talk about it. It's a really exciting thing. You feel incredible when you start climbing better. And social media provides unfortunately, an easy way to start spewing about all that. It's just,
Chris, I'd like to throw something in here. Clearly crowding at the crags and bad behavior is a bigger and bigger issue. But, I think that the more people that come out to these beautiful places, the more advocates we get. I mean, we're all advocates for wild places, for parks, for open land. I mean, these are things that are important to us. And, and there's a big tug and pull between industry and business and development and these places. And so, the more people we can get out to the crags and win over to our side, the more kind of power we have to maintain those places. So there are some potential upside benefits. I mean, climbing is becoming a pretty big industry now. And, it's got more and more, although it's still small, it's gaining political might. Climbing's in the Olympics this summer. There are a whole bunch of things that are happening that are, giving people that are doing the work like Gene with NRAC, that give them some more muscle, more potential donors, more potential volunteers. and more people that are going to, to advocate for those
Yeah.
places. So it can be a positive if it's,
You're absolutely right, and it's the way of the world. So we've got to make lemonade out of this, and you're absolutely right. It's we have a bigger voice.
Yeah.
The lobby efforts that have been going on in the interest of I like couching all this in the context of growing the outdoor economy, because the outdoor economy is many things, but it's all beneficial stuff to like local health and fitness and an adventure lifestyle. And there's an economy attached to that, and people can be a part of that in many different ways. And I think that ever since the Outdoor Industry Association began to quantify the contribution to state economies of the outdoor economy, that's a place where we can put this and kind of shift the values that drive how we take care of land and how we use land.
Just one last thing.
Go ahead, Doug.
I would also say that, having been around for a long time, it's crazy to go back to some of these places. Some of the national parks, like Rocky Mountain National Park, the last time I was there, you couldn't get to the bouldering area. The whole park was just absolute gridlock. It's a gigantic traffic jam. That's the same thing in Yosemite. And a lot of these other places that we treasure as climbers, just the sheer numbers of people are just overwhelming these places. So this is not unique to climbing, I guess is where I'm going.
Yeah.
And, but there is still, I think, a fair amount of untapped outdoor climbing resource out there if we can, if we can advocate for these places and preserve these places, I think we can do some good for the environment as well. So,
Wes, I wanted to ask you, based on the gear trends, do you think that outdoor climbing is growing as quickly as indoor climbing, or do you think those two things kind of go hand in hand?
Good question.
I think they go hand in hand. I mean, especially with this past, let's say the 12 months, outdoor climbing is growing exponentially. And that's because, the main entry point for a lot of climbers, were the climbing gyms, and a lot of them were shut down. And, still of them are, a lot of climbing gyms are still at limited capacity. So a lot of folks are going outside. I mean, we're selling a lot more climbing ropes I wouldn't say than we used to, but it's definitely on an upward trend of people wanting to get outside. And so, yeah, I think it's pretty close, but I would say outdoors, there's still a lot of people going outdoors. And I spend a lot of time in climbing gyms all over the Southeast. And every single time I'm in a gym for an evening event, there's anywhere from 2, 5, 6 people come up and say, I just started. And then some of those people don't have plans to go outside, but a lot of them do. A lot of them spend most of their weekends traveling to climbing areas. So, and mostly outdoor stuff. So, I'm mostly there during the week, trying to capture just seeing a lot of the folks that are in the gym for a weekly activity, and a lot of those people get prepared at the gym during the week to take their weekend excursions, which are a lot of times outdoor climbing areas.
So, Wes, you've seen an increase in trad gear sales this past year?
Absolutely. Yeah, we
Really
sell wild country cams and carabiners, and we're selling a whole lot more than we used to, for sure. I mean, definitely still selling quick draws for sport climbers. Just kind of a carabiner system to kind of connect you to the wall. But with trad climbing gear, where you're going to place those pieces of equipment into a crack and make upward progression, and then the next person would come up and remove that gear. Absolutely, yeah, we're selling definitely a lot more gear.
How do you think these new folks, maybe they've been climbing a gym for a while, and then they go outside and then they go, wow, trad climbing is really cool. How are these folks learning? That's where the mentor kicks in. Like sport climbing is a little more self-explanatory when you follow the fixed anchors, but how do they learn? How are people learning how to use gear? Are you teaching them?
No, I'm definitely not a guide, so I don't really teach people how to use gear. I can kind of show them briefly how to use maybe a
Stopper.
piece of stopper maybe to put into a crack. But no, I kind of refrain myself from teaching anybody just because I'm not certified, nor do I want the liability in case somebody were to get hurt. I do know a lot of gyms do have, kind of that same thing, a gym to crag. So they'll, a lot of some of the climbing gyms I go to, they have a certified guide that works in the gym, and therefore they would lead trips outdoors. So that's, I think, is becoming more popular. And I think that would be, something to explore for a lot of gyms that, are looking to kind of do the gym to crag transition, would be to have a full-time guide on staff and just fill trips up immediately, there from the gym. But no, I'm not taking people out, unfortunately.
How do you interface with the interest in outdoor climbing, Doug? Do you have guide services you partner with, or do you have staff that are keen to go out and teach people?
Well, of course, the last year has been a lot different, but
Right.
we have, in the past, we've had in-house guides like Wes is talking about. We've done top rope anchor building classes. So for people that aren't as familiar with climbing, both in a gym and in an outdoor situation, if you're using a rope, you're using it just to catch you if you fall. You're typically not, you're not hand over handing up the rope itself. The rope is there for your safety if you fall off. You're climbing the rock. With a top rope, you have a rope that comes from the top of the crag down to the climber. And so as the climber climbs up, the rope is pulled in. And if they should fall, they simply hang on the end of the rope. It's a little more complicated than that, but you can do a quick Google search and sort that out. But of course, there's some, for people that are familiar with climbing, there's a big difference from going in the gym where so much of it is controlled and also prefixed for you to going outside. So we taught some of those classes, but if you look at the numbers, first, there's some expense involved because you have to have a guide. If you look at the percentage of gym members that will pay for those classes at enough of a market rate to cover the expense of the guide, it's not many. It's barely scratching the surface. So we do refer to guide services. We recommend guide services. And we'll try to help people if they have a trip somewhere. We'll try to hook them up with a guide, in Devil's Tower or in Las Vegas or wherever they're going. But I think those, I assume that you guys self-taught. I definitely self-taught. I had Royal Robbins Rockcraft book in the 70s and figured out on my own. There's a great independence, I think, when people start going outside, that they want to kind of learn the stuff on their own. And it would be really helpful if more of them would attend classes and get some formal training. And again, we got caught pretty quickly with mentors who saw, boy, you guys are bozos, you need some help. Here, I'm going to come help you. And again, now the scale has gotten so vast that you drive yourself crazy if you try to help everyone at the crag. It's frankly sometimes terrifying. You guys walk the crags and see some of the things that are happening, and you just go, oh my God. And you try to to help, but it's a struggle.
I think that real quick here, the Jeremy question that I was going to ask earlier was, how do you implement a gym to crag program? And I feel like we've kind of answered that question a little bit in these last few minutes here with talking about that. But it is definitely, if you're going outdoors for the first time and someone comes up and is giving you some advice, you should listen to it. I mean, especially if it's, one of you older guys.
Hey, Wes and Doug, do you guys have a sense of, is guiding really growing in the U.S.? I mean, if indoor climbing is growing, outdoors climbing growing, is guiding blowing up? I haven't heard people talk about it.
My guess would be no.
Yeah, my guess would be no as well. A lot of times, I guess, and I answered maybe that question earlier, where not necessarily gyms have have guides that necessarily work for them, but more of like they might work part-time and help promote their guide service. I don't know if they're actually funded through the gym. Like I wouldn't say there's not a high number of guides who actually are employed by the gym. It's more of just an avenue to
It's a,
be there, maybe set up a table. I've seen at some of the gyms. But I wouldn't say the guide business is on fire or growing, or there's so exponentially more guides in the Southeast, for instance.
I think it's a tough business model.
Yeah.
I think, you talk to people that, even the people that are being fairly successful are still, I mean, it's a hustle.
It's a hustle, yeah.
Yeah.
I would throw in that, a lot of the guides, because we have a guide service here at Adventures on the Gorge, and a lot of the people that we guide are families going out for an experience. I think
Right.
like Doug said, and we hold steady. And of course, the more families that we get here on our property, the more families we're going to take climbing. But I think, as Doug mentioned earlier, people that are getting into climbing, I didn't want to get a guide when I first went outdoors. I went with my friends that already knew what they were doing, and they taught me,
Yeah.
self-taught, and why would I
Well,
pay?
how did you know they knew what they were doing?
Well, one of them was the gentleman that owned the two gyms that I eventually ended up managing, and he'd been up El Cap several times, so I
Okay.
kind of figured he knew what was going on.
I mean, I think that is a message that we try to drive home, that you're spending all this money on gear. You're spending all this money on your gym membership. You're spending money on the car ride to the new, your camping gear or your hotel room or whatever it is you're doing. And you won't spend a couple $100 for a few days of guiding to really get a good foundation of base skills. It is a disconnect. And I really wish more people that want to get into climbing, boy, that's a way to springboard.
Yeah.
It really is. I've heard so many testimonials from people who've done that. We have a guide service, New River Mountain Guides, that operates out of our shop. It's a separate business, but they've really had to find a way to make that work for folks who, they're competent, but they know there's more to learn, and they've just had really breakthrough experiences. I mean, if you climb for a while, you find, there are people you climb with. You climb better with certain people than other people. There's like, I've always compared it to golf. You're always competing with yourself, but then there's certain people you play with and you just play a better game. And so it'll be interesting to see if that gains some traction. One thing I think that's in play is, they're older folks getting into climbing, and those folks tend to oftentimes feel fine getting a guide because they're not 20 something or younger.
Yeah.
They're 40 something or 50 something, and they're going climbing for the first time.
So we heard, Gene, you spoke earlier about how the effect of the COVID-19 pandemic on your business, and how it exploded after we were able to start opening things back up. But Doug and Wes, I'm curious how it affected your businesses.
Wes, you want to go first?
Go for it, Doug.
Okay. Our business was closed for 5.5 months, so that's a pretty major impact.
Yes.
In 2020, we did, I think, 42% of our 2019 number, and we were expecting to grow in 2020 by 20% over our 2019 number. So that's a huge financial hit. One of the things that I do on the side is I volunteer with the Climbing Wall Association, the North American group that works with climbing gyms to help develop protocols, industry standards, insurance, et cetera. And I am the chairman of the research advisory committee for that group. And they have been surveying on a monthly basis gyms and how they're going. So we finally did one to kind of wrap the year of COVID, which would be March through February of this past year. the climbing gym industry, we estimate lost $373 million in sales
Yeah.
in 1 year. Now, and when we say climbing gyms, remember they're just a part of the climbing industrial complex. So climbing gyms are recreational facilities where the primary activity is climbing on artificial walls. Oftentimes they'll have yoga and weightlifting and those things, but there are, or there were in 2019, I think 577 unique climbing gyms. So then you layer on top of that recreation walls, adjuncts to colleges and universities, YMCA's, outdoor recreation programs, all of these other things. I mean, it was a huge, huge hit. And currently, I don't have that latest number with me. I think that we are operating industry-wide right now at just north of 50% of what would be expected at this time of year. So the industry is still really struggling. The indoor climbing gym industry is really struggling.
Is there reluctance to go back to the gym, you think?
Well, there are, I don't know how many climbing gyms in California. California was closed until about 2 weeks ago.
Right.
And, they're now at 10%. Yeah, there's definitely still reluctance to come back. The climbing gyms they're one of the lowest risk things that you can do in a COVID situation for indoor recreation. Much lower risk even than your typical health club. In large part because of the volume of the space, because climbing gyms tend to be tall, and the density of people in them is pretty low. But we're seeing, at least in our business right now, we normally have about 8% of our members frozen at any one time. And right now we're almost at 20%. So we've got a good chunk of people who value us enough to maintain a membership in a frozen state. They haven't quit, they haven't left the sport, but they're just not ready to come back yet. And that has slowly grown since we technically reopened back in September. So it's been a very slow growth back. But we're not done yet.
And Wes, how about your business?
Yeah, I would agree. I think gyms are it's definitely regional, like over in kind of more the central part of North Carolina, the gyms are busy. And in Tennessee, they're pretty busy, kind of up in lower Midwest, it seems like not as many people are jumping back into the gyms. It's kind of a state to state business or, state of affairs. But as far as COVID definitely put a big crunch as far as the manufacturing side of my business or, in the industry that I'm in is just the raw materials. A lot of the factories where a lot of the climbing goods are made, just a bottleneck of just having a hard time getting raw materials to be able to make new products. And we're seeing that across the board from everything, from raw materials for climbing ropes. Some of the brands we represent had to lay off some employees during early COVID, and they're having a hard time training employees. Kind of getting enough people back into the company to get them, staff trained back up to be able to make, say, climbing ropes, for instance. So that's been a big bottleneck. Of course, a lot of our products are made overseas. The ports have been pretty slammed, LA especially. A lot of goods come in through LA, and there was, 50, 60 boats sitting out in the port. And then they would take, sometimes on a normal year, 24 to 48 hours, those boats would get unloaded. And now sometimes they'll sit out there for 7 or 10 days. Yeah. So that's, it's just been a little hard for, I think, a lot of, outdoor stores to get the products.
Yeah.
So that's been kind of an effect, but things are getting back to normal. A lot of it's just a raw material kind of shortage. And then, COVID shutdowns out in LA, everything comes in through LA. Yeah. So for the most part, and it's been a struggle, but we're getting back on board. I mean, I'm sure Gene, your stores, you probably have products, but some things you're probably out of.
Probably waiting on.
Well, it's kind of been spastic this spring, but we're still getting product. What I've been hearing is, this is just something I heard, was that the supply is going to get tighter. So June's going to be like by June, supply is going to be tighter for the balance of the year. And have you heard, are you seeing forecasts for your lines that reflect any gap that's coming up? I mean, we're not over the hump, is my impression.
Correct. Yeah. I mean, I think for us, with some of our brands, we're getting better. Our rope brand is inventory is low. And for instance, like we sell tents and sleeping bags, for instance, and then just like the raw materials for tent poles,
Right.
Yeah.
So some things are backed up. I think by August, a lot of things are going to ship. I know with like bicycles, for instance, kind of off subject, but there's only one place where all the saddles are made for all bicycles, and they don't have enough saddles to put on bikes, for instance. So I think by late summer we're going to be in a better spot, but I would say it's going to drift into the first quarter of 2022 would be my best guess.
All right. Well, guys, we're starting to run out of time here, but I've got a couple of guest viewer questions, guest questions that I wanted to ask, and we just answer these up kind of real quick. First off, Gene, could you give the dates for that not work week again?
May 15th, which is a Saturday, through May 22nd, which is a Saturday.
Cool. So thank you very much.
And you can go on the NRAC, the New River Alliance Climbers website, and the contact info is there, and we will hook you up. It's a good time.
So there you go. That is the NRAC website, NRAC website, New River Alliance Climbers. We've got a question from David Lowry coming through from Facebook. And he says, I've never climbed before. How do I get started? And what's the best way to get started? Where should I go? Basically, he's asking where you should go to get started.
Where does he live?
He says he's done a lot of hiking on the trails in Fayetteville. So I'm assuming around here somewhere. So
stop by the shop.
Yeah.
If he wants to go climbing.
Get a guide service, find Adventures on the Gorge.
Yeah. Go to a gym.
Yeah, I'd say if you're not in a place with a gym, get a guide. It'll really
it's a great way to start.
It'll really maximize your first experience, and it'll get you, if you love it, it'll get you a really good foundational point. And if you're in a big city, the gym is different than climbing outside in a lot of ways, but it is similar in others. I mean, there's still a climbing community aspect. You'll meet a lot of really neat people out in the woods climbing at the new, but you'll also meet a lot of really fun people in a climbing gym. Climbing gyms are more social, but not dramatically so. And they can give you a taste for what the physical part of it is and what the movement feels like. But of course there are some big differences, but it'll give you a taste of it, and then hire a guide.
Good advice.
Lastly, this will be our last question for the evening. We had a question from Christy Buckley that has also come through on Facebook, and she is wondering, this goes back to, we were talking earlier about going up to people that you were seeing making mistakes outside, and she's asking, what is an appropriate way to give others an advice while outdoor climbing so that you don't seem like a know-it-all or a condescending elitist?
I will be happy to take that one if you want. There is a real trick to it. And in fact, so in the climbing gym business, we have people making mistakes all the time. And it's critical for us to correct those quickly before we end up with accidents. And we will oftentimes have younger folks working the front counter who appear to maybe not be as experienced, and they may have to correct a more experienced person who's still not doing things right. I think it's really important to be disarming with them. I think it's important to acknowledge, hey, that might be a way that you can do things, but can I show you this a better way that I've just learned. You need to engage people. You can't just go up and say, hey, you're a moron, stop doing that. So I would definitely try to make a personal connection first, and then say, hey, I noticed that you were, and climbers will get this, you were dropping your brake hand when you were belaying.
Yeah.
Really neat trick, and it's simple to do. If I'm out like on a mountain bike ride, if I ever see somebody without a helmet, I always tell them, hey, man, you're braver than me. I've broken 2 helmets and I would have been dead both times. I'll never leave the car without a helmet. Be safe out there. And that'll usually get their attention, like, whoa. So anything that you can do along those lines to disarm somebody, and then try not to come across as a know-it-all, but say, hey, I've learned this really neat trick, or my buddy who's the best climber in the world showed me this. So there are some ways to do it, but I think making a personal connection first.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
More than a few. Any other tips on that?
Well, you got to keep a little humor in the discussion. You got to, like you're saying, you just got to connect and just go, hey, we're all hanging out here together, but
Yeah.
I don't want to see anybody get hurt.
No. All right, gentlemen, we're going to wrap this up. We did get to everybody's questions that came through this evening, so that's great. Please join us for our next Adventure Forum, which will be on Wednesday, April 28th at 7:30. The subject is to be determined. Keep an eye out on our Facebook page for what that subject will be. We'll be posting those. And as for our past forums, those can all be seen on our Facebook page at Adventures on the Gorge, or on our YouTube channel. Thank you once again, Gene, Wes, and Doug, for being here. We really appreciate your time and all of the great answers that you gave us. And to all of our viewers out there, thank you for joining us. Stay safe, stay healthy, and we will see you next time. This is Chris Hayes signing off from Adventures on the Gorge.
Thank you.
Good night.